wants to be the first climate neutral continent in the world. Even though the finish line is 30 years away, the race starts now. The 2020s is the make or break decade. And that's why Europe has committed to reduce our emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels.
We must guide our societies to a cleaner and healthier future. This transition will affect our daily lives, from the cars we drive, from the houses we live in, from the jobs we will have in the future. I'm confident that we can make it if we do two things. If we set ourselves a sound direction and stand together as a continent in mastering the challenge.
We are building a model for a clean economy that is also a prosperous economy, and both is doable.
From Jakarta, and hope everybody had a good start of their day. Welcome to the European Union and Indonesia towards a successful UN Climate Summit and Partnership for a Green Transition public forum with His Excellency Executive Vice President of the European Union, Frans Timmermans. My name is Esther, and today I will be your MC. And firstly, I'd like to greet our participants today who are joining live from YouTube. I've been told that more than 1,200 people across Indonesia and beyond have joined. And you don't only come from Indonesia, but also from countries such as East Timor, Canada, United Kingdom, and beyond. So welcome. Good morning from Jakarta. Before we start our discussion today, I would like to remind everyone that we also provide a Bahasa Indonesia interpretation for you who are needing a Bahasa Indonesia translation. The audio for Bahasa Indonesia live streaming have been sent to the YouTube chat. Kami juga menyediakan audio bahasa Indonesia bagi para pemirsa yang ingin mendengarkan dengan terjemahan bahasa Indonesia. Link bahasa Indonesia sudah kami kirimkan di YouTube chat. So today's public forum will talk about the COP26 preparations as we are nearing Glasgow summit later this month, and also the potential for European Union and Indonesia to work in terms of green transition and partnership for the climate. So without further ado, let me pass over the floor to Dr. Dino Patijala, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, to be our moderator today.
Thank you very much, Esther, and I want to welcome everybody who's joining our talk today, and especially Bapak Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President of European Union. Welcome, Pak Frans. I hope you're having a good stay and a good productive visit.
And it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Oh, yes, thank you. All right, and as usual, we're going to open with a pantun. Pak Frans, you're very familiar with Indonesia, coming from Holland, and pantun is an Indonesian traditional rap or poetry. So let me begin. I asked a pretty lady for a dance, but I fell down the ladder trying to get her. Welcome to Indonesia, Vice President Timmermans. Let's champion climate agenda together. Okay, so Pak Frans, this is like 1 month before COP26 in Glasgow, which is expected to be a very critical negotiations for the next climate actions, and a lot of countries are gearing up for it. President Joko Widodo will be attending Glasgow himself, will bring a delegation of officials and business people. Tell me, you know, EU has been a leading force on climate negotiations. How is your preparations in the run-up for COP26 in Glasgow, and what are your expectations for Glasgow? Is it going to be tough negotiations, and do you think there'll be a strong consensus coming out of it?
Well, first of all, Ambassador, let me thank you and the foreign policy community of Indonesia, Eurocham, and Kadin for organizing this discussion. It's most timely and very welcome. So thank you very much. And also thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'll try not to fall off the ladder during this conversation. Your question is very pertinent, Ambassador, because, you know, over the last years, most people have become increasingly worried about the international community's capacity to come together on tackling the climate crisis. And then we've had this extremely worrying IPCC report that shows that we are not on track to stay within the goals the Paris Agreement had reached. And then, of course, there's hardly any country on earth that hasn't been confronted with the negative consequences of the climate crisis already. Wildfires, monsoons taking 2 months, harvests going wrong, tornadoes in the heart of Europe, something we've never seen, droughts, etc. So 50 degrees Celsius temperature in Northwest Canada. I mean, when did we ever see that sort of thing? And it is clear that this is all linked to the climate crisis. So the sense of urgency could not be bigger. And then the sense that until now, the international community is not coming together is also strong. But in the last couple of months, we've seen some really encouraging movement on many sides. I think we have an opportunity to come together in Glasgow and to be able to say after the meeting in Glasgow, we are still on track to stay well below 2 degrees temperature rise as compared to pre-industrial levels. We still have a shot at the 1.5 degrees. But for that to happen, 3 things need to be done. First of all, the industrialized world especially needs to up the ante, needs to become more ambitious in terms of emission reduction. That is absolutely crucial. We've done our part, I think, as European Union with the climate law that now sets into law our climate neutrality by 2050 and our reduction of emissions with at least 55% by 2030 as compared to 1990. Now, we also ask our partners to go in the same direction. Many are making encouraging signals. United States has come on board recently, Canada, Japan, Korea, etc. So it is moving in the right direction. So the first thing is more ambition in terms of reductions. The second is the rich part of the world had promised $100 billion of climate financing to help the developing world to adapt to climate change and to mitigate the rise of the temperature. So we need to come through on the $100 billion. That is extremely important. We're taking our responsibility as a European Union. We are now providing up to 1/3 of that total of 100 billion, after also President von der Leyen announced a month ago that we would add another $5 billion to the already large envelope. So we are providing 1/3. We are now calling on our international partners to do more. I'm even calling on the member states of the European Union to do more, and I hope they will, so that we can finally prove that we are true to our word and we put the $100 billion on the table. We're still not there yet, but we're working on that very hard. And the third is about the rules of the game. You know, the international community needs to come together so that we have transparency on carbon trading, that we are accountable to what we do, that we take into account the potential of nature-based solutions, etc., that we solve the problems that have been on the table and not been solved since Paris on the rule book, on Article 6, etc. So I think these are the 3 main issues that we need to solve. Again, I am more optimistic than a couple of months ago, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet, and we will need a couple of weeks of very, very tough negotiations after the leaders, including the president of Indonesia, have come together, first the G20 and then in Glasgow at the beginning of the COP, and make a firm commitment, political commitment at the highest level that they want the conference to be a success. If we can get that start, then us negotiators will have to continue and then come up with a conclusion. Again, the goal being that we stay within the goals set by Paris, stay well below 2 degrees and have a shot at 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your optimism, and we wish you all the best of luck. You know, we noticed that every time COP negotiations begin, there's always tough debates, and I've been in some of them myself. In what ways do you think the debate in Glasgow will be different than the debate in Paris and previous debates?
Well, now is the time to become very concrete. It is relatively easy, although it is an important political commitment, but still it's easy to say we'll be carbon neutral by 2050 or 2060. But then you have to have a plan how you get there. And that plan needs to start today. And then it becomes more difficult. So how are you going to make the switch to renewable energy? How are you going to reduce the emissions in transport? How are you going to build more energy efficient buildings? How are you going to invest in all the renewable energy grids that you need? How are you going to make sure that you leave no one behind, that this doesn't lead to energy poverty for large parts of your population, and that you make sure you organize redistribution in such a way that the population as a whole can support this transition? You know, this is one of the most fundamental transitions humanity has ever had to go through in an extremely limited period of time. Transitions very often take a generation. Now we have to do this. We have to set the scene in less than 10 years, which is a huge burden, politically, financially, scientifically, I would say, technologically, but we can do it. We can do it. And I think the spirit of can do should prevail here, even though we know it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. And for a public who's watching, I want to underscore what Franz just said, that we can think about 2050 net zero, but that won't be achieved unless we do real work and reduce emissions in the next 10 years, right? So don't think that 2050 is still a long time, 30 years. No. In order to get there, you got to work now, right? And Glasgow is the key to achieve that. Now, Franz, EU has come up with a Green Deal, and one of the elements of it is the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And I know there's been some response from developing countries, including from Indonesia, who's worried that this carbon adjustment mechanism will lead to some trade barriers that developing countries may not be ready for. And especially they argue that the technology and resources for sustainable energy is different between developed countries and developing countries. You know, how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, we need to be clear about what CBAM actually is. CBAM only has one goal, and the goal being to avoid carbon leakage. What is carbon leakage? Carbon leakage is that when we introduce stricter legislation, or when we introduce a price on carbon, that our industry, to avoid that price or to avoid that legislation, would move elsewhere. And then that's a lose-lose situation, because you lose your industry and you don't reduce emissions, because the emissions will be coming from elsewhere. So we need to avoid that situation. By the way, that's not just a European challenge. All industrialized nations who are putting a price on carbon will be faced with the question how to avoid carbon leakage. Our proposal is CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Others will come with comparable proposals, etc. So how do you, what are the guarantees we offer our trading partners? First of all, CBAM will be WTO conform. It will be in conformity with World Trade Organization rules. That is the first assurance we will give. Secondly, what we will also do is have a trial run of 2 years. So we will start with a trial period where we can identify which areas would be affected and which trading partners would be affected. Now, we do this in 5 main areas: steel, aluminium, fertilizer, cement, and electricity. These are the 5 areas where we will be looking at. Now, in general, I think I can say that if countries take steps to decarbonize their economy, which in fact will always end up with putting a price on carbon, and go into the same direction to be in conformity with Paris, the risk that a CBAM would be applied to those countries is very low indeed. So if we all move in the same direction, CBAM will not be necessary. But if the risk is present of our industry leaving Europe to go and produce in a dirty way somewhere else, we need to address that risk. We need to address that risk and make sure carbon leakage doesn't happen. So that's the context within which we operate. But I want to underscore, anything we will do will be in conformity with the World Trade Organization rules. And secondly, we will have a trial run of a couple of years to check what the effects could potentially be on our trading partners.
Yeah. So you affirm that CBAM will not be protectionist in any way?
It is not a protectionist measure, but it's a measure to make sure we don't have carbon leakage. But the effect could be that there is going to be a levy on products coming into Europe to level the playing field. That could be the effect, so that industry is not incentivized to leave Europe and to go and produce in a dirty way outside of Europe.
Okay. Now, Bapak Frans, you here, and you'll be meeting with the president and a number of cabinet ministers to discuss climate action. Can you share with us what are EU's plans for climate cooperation with Indonesia, especially in terms of achieving green transition?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm really excited by the recent developments in Indonesia, the incredibly rapid rise of awareness that we have a climate crisis and that we need to do something about this, the clear ambition of Indonesia to be one of the climate leaders, certainly in Southeast Asia, the wish to also be part and leaders in the G20 discussion about, for instance, getting out of coal in a certain period of time. So the wish to increase the potential of nature-based solutions, the wish to improve the health of oceans, et cetera, et cetera. This has really caught our attention, that Indonesia has become very ambitious. At the same time, Indonesia is growing at quite a high rate. So the risk of creating difficulties because energy consumption will need to go up, et cetera, is also there. And there, the uptake and the potential of renewables in Indonesia is fabulous. I mean, if you would look at solar energy, geothermal energy, offshore wind energy, these offer huge potential for Indonesia, given its natural environment, and it also offers huge development potential for the more remote areas in Indonesia, because you create with renewable energy, which is the cheapest energy on earth, you create huge potential also locally and regionally. So I think there is a huge. I mean, I would be hard pressed to find a country in the developing world that is better positioned to profit from a transition to renewable energy than Indonesia, and also to become a world leader. You know, if you have all this access renewable energy and you put that into, for instance, green hydrogen that you can use to store and use also to store the energy or to transport it over long distances. Because if you have one thing in Indonesia, it's very long distances. If you can do all that, then you know, the growth of your economy, the growth of your prosperity does not have to go at the expense of your natural environment. On the contrary, you can use that growth to become also a carbon neutral society by the middle of this century. And I find that extremely exciting, because the effects this optimism will have on many parts of the developing world is going to be very positive. That's why I want to pay so much attention to the bilateral relations between the European Union and Indonesia. Indonesia also, you know, you're in a tough neighborhood. You're in a tough neighborhood. Many things are happening. You are a leader in ASEAN. ASEAN is a preferred partner for developing our relations with the European Union. So all the stars are aligned in a good way, I would say.
Yeah, well, thank you. And my organization, FPCI, is now still actively calling on the government to be more ambitious in terms of its climate net zero target. At the moment, it's 2060 or earlier, but the FPCI and the young people are calling for 2050. And I agree with you that you know, last year the climate agenda was somewhat neglected because of COVID crisis, understandably. But starting from this year, the climate campaign, the climate policy of the government has begun to progress. And we hope that it will be significantly enhanced by the time of COP26, inshallah. All right. So now let's move on to questions from the private sector. We are very happy to have Kadin and also Eurocham taking part in this discussion. I would like to give the first questions to Julian Steimer, from Chairman of the Board of Eurocham. Julian, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here representing 200 companies in Indonesia and all the European bilateral chambers with their 600 members. I have a question, Mr. President, about the carbon credit trading. Is the EU aiming to revitalize the cross-border trade of certificates? Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, Julien, let me compliment you on this wonderful batik shirt you're wearing. I really love it. Very nice. No, the answer to your question is no. We need to meet our targets domestically. You can't, shove this off on somebody else. We need to do this domestically. There's one exception, and that's in the aviation field with CORSIA, where we would allow the use of credits towards this obligation, provided they are accounted for in the right way. We do not preclude purchase of and use of credits for additional voluntary action, though that might be possible. But the basic answer to your question is no. We need to meet our targets domestically.
Okay. Next question I have from Vera Galuh Subianto, board member of Eurocham. Vera, how are you, Vera?
Hello, Pat. Thank you. I'm fine. Hope everyone here is also well.
Okay. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So I think to add on to the questions representing Eurocham members, we have a topic related with the investment by the Asian Development Bank, planning to put $100 billion to support the energy transition. So it's buying and transitioning from fossil power plants. For sure, this will create a huge impact for many countries, including Indonesia. Is there a plan for the EU to join the program?
Well, the EU is very interested in this program, and we will study it very carefully because it looks on face value, it looks very, very promising. The European Investment Bank is now a green bank. They have made this commitment very strongly in the last couple of years. They will be opening an office in Jakarta very soon. And I can imagine that with their experience and with their ambition, they could work closely with the Asian Development Bank to see what we can do together. And I will stimulate them to enhance this cooperation, because I think there's some really exciting things here, and especially for Indonesia, because Indonesia for well over a century has been an economy based on energy, based on fossil fuels mainly. And the energy will remain at the core of any economic development in Indonesia, as we know. The only thing is, Indonesia, like us in Europe, will have to learn to do this with renewable energy and have to learn to no longer depend on fossil fuels so that we reach net zero by the middle of the century. And I find this a very exciting development because you have the natural environment. I mean, also geothermal, I didn't even go into that, but offshore wind, where Europe leads, is a huge potential. And the investment will almost be paying for itself. It is such an interesting area to invest. What you need to assure is that investors internationally are not just development banks or the private sector, because that's where the bulk of the money will be coming from. You need to make sure that they feel safe in Indonesia, that they know that they are protected against corruption, that they know that their investment is in good hands. Then the investment will come because it's a no-brainer. Solar energy, offshore wind energy, geothermal, the return on the investment is excellent and also comes very soon. You don't have to wait very long once you have installed the installation. So I would really hope that we would put energy at the core of our relationship, but also at the core of Indonesia's economic development. Renewable energy as a huge potential. And I'm sure the Asian Development Bank will look at this very carefully, and I can assure you that the European Investment Bank will also be part of that.
Okay, now I would like to give the microphone to any cabinet members who are here who might want to ask any questions. Is there any cabinet members? By the way, I want to acknowledge Sinta Kamdani, Bernardino Vega, and Tonny Buenas who are here. Yeah. So anyone? Okay, while we wait for cabinet members, let me move on to the question from the youth. We have Hannah, one of our brightest FPCI chapters members, who has a question for Papa Franz. Hannah?
Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Dino. I would like to ask on behalf of 21 FPCI university chapters across the country. My question is, what can the young generation do to create visible impact on reaching the net zero emission in the university level besides youth activism? And is there any comprehensive cooperation on climate action among universities or knowledge sector in European Union that can serve as an example for Indonesia? Thank you.
Oh, I love your question. I love your question because we are working very hard on that. You know, let me be very clear. There would not be a European Green Deal without the Fridays for Future. So it's driven by the young people in Europe. They have heightened the sense of urgency. They have forced the European body politic to move faster. So I'm really, really grateful to the youngest generation, and we need to mobilize them on a global scale. And you were asking about networks. We have launched a network of young people. We call them ambassadors across the European Union. So many have signed up, hundreds, and they are creating their own networks. I just saw a proposal last week that won a prize that we had organized a competition of universities creating networks across the European continent. And what I will do is bring you in touch with them, and they can explain to you exactly how they structure the networks, how this is then sort of in a very trickle down way is then organized within the universities, and then the ideas are filtered up and centralized and then shared across the board. I think I'm absolutely sure that these universities in Europe would be very excited to also work with you and perhaps to share their experience, or you could be part of the network, or you could create your own network. So I make you this promise that I will bring you in touch with them, and I make sure that this exchange can lead to something that is fruitful for both sides. They can learn from you and you can learn from them.
Thank you. And I can categorically say, Franz, that part of the reasons why climate agenda has been gaining ground in the past 8 months or so is because the youth are calling it, and the millennials and the youth are important political force in this country, right? So very much. Can
I add a few comments on this? And I just want to, because this is what I do in Europe all the time. I'm grateful to young people, but I also encourage them to get better organized. That is because until a couple of years ago, young people in Europe, they were very idealistic, but they thought that, you know, putting their ideals on Facebook or Instagram would be enough, and then the ideals would self-materialize. Now they've understood that that doesn't work like that. They need to get organized, they need to exchange, they need to create structures, and that's what we see happening now. You know, I don't know about Indonesia, but in Europe, I am so grateful to this generation. They sacrificed so much in the last couple of years in the COVID crisis of their own freedom, because they weren't that threatened, but their parents were. My generation was very threatened by COVID, and they limited their own freedom to help the older generations. And I think it's about payback time now. The older generation should start acting in the interest of the younger generation. And I think addressing the climate crisis is something I'm a grandfather by now. I need to do this for my grandson. I need to do this for my children. It's not for me. And it's about time my generation would start doing things not for themselves, but for next generations, like our grandparents did after the Second World War, like your Indonesian grandparents did after you fought for liberation and freedom. They also sacrificed, knowing that they would not profit from this themselves, but they knew their children and grandchildren would. We need to rekindle that spirit. And for that, we need young people to be well organized.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We now have a question from Zaidan from the Indonesian Student Association of Environmental Engineers. And then after that, there's someone from Mr. Richard from Eurocham. But first, Mr. Zaidan, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Zaidan. I'm the representative of Indonesian Students Associations of Environmental Engineers. My question is, how does the government in Europe or European member states accommodate students' participation in climate discussions or important high-level forums? And how does the EU government respond to the suggestion or aspirations of the students?
Well, we exchanging experience and helping students acquire the knowledge that is needed in this transition is of huge, huge importance. So we have two direct threats to our survival. One is the climate crisis, and the other is the looming ecocide, what we call usually the biodiversity crisis. To address these crises, we need the best minds in engineering and in all forms of science to come together and find solutions that can help us there. Some of these solutions are already there in embryonic form and need to be elaborated. Some are already quite mature and can be put to market. But for this to happen, we need, this in exact sciences, your best capacities are at a very young age. Before the age of 25. That's when you are most creative. That's where you find the best solutions. And at that level, we need to bring students together. We have a system in Europe that is called the Erasmus Plus program, which allows for students to travel and spend time at other universities. We are more than happy to also accommodate Indonesian students and other students in Europe in this context. I come from a country, the Netherlands, but also in Germany and several other countries. We've had over many, many years a lot of Indonesian students in the science sector coming and learning and bringing the knowledge back to Indonesia. Of course, because of COVID, it's been very difficult in the last couple of years. But now we need to pick it up again. In the last 15 years approximately, we have had about 2,000 Indonesian students and lecturers come to the EU through Horizon Europe. I think we need to look at making it widely possible for Indonesian students to profit from our knowledge, and I will certainly try and enhance that as much as I can.
Thank you. Now we go back to the private sector, and after that, we have more students who will ask questions. Richard, please raise your question.
Yes. Good morning, Your Excellency. Also from Eurocham, we have a very strong private sector engagement in the renewable development, and our members are trying hard to create a sustainable development in Indonesia, which is much tougher than in Europe, because we don't have feed-in tariffs, we don't have subsidies, we don't have wind. We don't have wind for wind power. That's a problem. I come from the wind power development in my earlier days, so I can share with you that it's really a challenge with these huge distances, with the limitation of space where you have the demand and with no wind. We have a USP with the geothermal, which is very, very risky and expensive, and Indonesia is number 1 or 2 in geothermal. And I think it would be extremely necessary to consider a European investment funding program to enable the ASEAN interconnection, because that would solve immediately all the problems. And again, this is horribly expensive, And it would be the possibility for Europe to demonstrate their support and execution power in renewables. It would be done by guarantees for the transmission privatization efforts. I think that would be the easiest thing. Or again, you could partake in we can develop a separate European program to retire the old inefficient power plants. So Eurochem is ready to work with you on this program. Thank you, and looking forward to your comments.
Well, my first comment would be that I'm surprised that you would say that Indonesia has no wind. In this huge country, there are certainly places that I thought were identified as potentially very useful on certain coasts for offshore wind farms, both fixed and floating. At least that's what I learned before coming here, studying the issue. Why am I saying this? Because Europe globally is leading, as you know, in offshore wind, and we have a lot to share. And we learned through also mistakes. We are now making turbines of a size that, you know, they're as big as the Eiffel Tower and even bigger at some point. So single turbines can generate quite a lot of energy. But if you say there's no wind, that would be obviously a problem. But I'm certainly interested in learning more about this. I've listened to you very carefully, but I'm certainly interested in learning more. But I would assume that especially on solar, there is so much potential on solar that needs to be developed. Europe was an early innovator on solar, and then of course most of it went to China and was further developed in China. Europe is now coming back also in the next generation of solar energy development, which looks very promising. As far as I can see, Indonesia has all the prime materials, all the industrial potential to develop its own solar industry, not just as, you know, creating solar energy, but also building the solar panels and all the installations you need for that and the grids. I think that would be an opportunity for Indonesian industry to develop also with European investors. I'm traveling on to India, and they have the ambition to increase their renewable energy generation with 450 gigawatts. I mean, that's the sort of scale they're thinking about, and much of that will be solar. And they will develop their own industry in that. And look at what you could do in Southeast Asia if you would develop that industry in this country. It's just me thinking aloud on the basis of the facts I know, but I think we should continue developing ideas along this line. And you mentioned geothermal, which is of huge potential. By the way, on a global scale, that's an energy source that has not had the attention it deserves. It has some security challenges, obviously, but it also has huge opportunities. I come from a region in the Netherlands where we used to have coal mines, and because of these mines being flooded and the water there being heated up, it is a huge potential source of the heat, especially the heating of housing or the cooling of housing in the summer that can be tapped. But for Indonesia, of course, with its enormous geothermal potential, it's far, far more than that that could be developed in the future.
Okay, I want to give the floor now to Emma Batty, who is a climate activist, one of my favorite people. Emma?
Thank you, Dr. Dino. It's a pleasure to see you again. Hi, everyone. My name is Nimade Emma Batty Sukarta, but I go as Emma. I'm 17. Thank you, FTCI, for having me. It's truly an honor to be here at this public forum and to hear you speak, Mr. Timmermans. So an obstacle for the climate change movement at the moment in many countries, and particularly here in Indonesia, is poverty. And since, of course, their priorities aren't necessarily the same as people in upper class and middle class. And so I, along with a large community of youth Indonesian activists, are trying to find ways to combat this directly from here in Indonesia. And so that leads me on to my question. I would like to ask, how will the EU work towards finding ways to encourage and include the poor and nations with high poverty rates in embracing climate change policies as well as sustainable living?
I think, Emma, that is one of the most important questions we have to answer, and we have to answer truthfully, and we have to answer with policies. You know, if you don't know how you're going to make it till the end of the month, the end of the earth is not your main concern. And that is something that we see, especially in the developing world. That is why the European Union is reorienting much of its financing for development towards the climate policy. We've increased that to 30%. We're going to increase that even more. We need to make sure, you know, this transformation is so fundamental. And what even in a rich continent like Europe, we risk that we now already have 30 million people in energy poverty, and we risk more people going into energy poverty. Now, if people have the feeling that this transformation leads to them being left behind, they will stop the transformation from happening. So especially in the developing world, we need to combine the energy transition with enhanced development, enhanced investment in human development. Make sure that education becomes more accessible, that outright poverty is combated more clearly, but also that you give communities at the small scale the chance to create energy autonomy. You could, for instance, with solar power, you can create energy autonomy in kampongs. You can create it in all sorts of places that would give access to electricity, which is good for health, so you don't need wood burning to cook your meal, which could give access to worldwide communication at a very low cost, etc., etc. It's empowering people we need to do. And Emma, I have to say, if there's one thing I would ask of your generation, is not just to talk to people like yourself who are privileged, who have a very high education, and basically already agree with each other. The only way in a democracy you can advance things is if you talk to people you disagree with, and you find common ground, or people who are not interested in what you're interested in, or people, especially people who feel they are being left behind. We cannot afford to leave people behind. And an age of transformation is always an age of huge redistribution. If public authorities do not intervene, a transformation will lead to a small, incredibly powerful and rich group, and to a large group that will be left behind. You saw it in the big tech transformation. It's created a couple of space tourists who think they can do anything because they're now so wealthy. They don't, taxation doesn't apply to them, rules don't apply to them. They spend their money on going out in outer space instead of spending it on saving our planet. You know, that's the sort of thing that happens in any industrial revolution. And the only ones who can intervene in this are public authorities mandated by a democratic mandate of their population. And that only happens if we leave no one behind. So, Emma, sorry to go on about this, but Emma, I believe you have got on to what is probably going to be the decisive question. If we create an opposition between climate and social, we will not have social and we will not have climate. Because the first victims of the climate crisis will be the weakest in our society. If they are mobilized to stop the transition, they will mobilize the planet against themselves instead of finding a way out. So we need to avoid that confrontation at all costs.
Yeah. And by the way, Emma, I want to tell you that my kids, my 12-year-old kids, say that they want to be like you. You're only 16 or 17, right? So really, thank you for your good work on climate activism, right? And actually, I want to be like you, right? All right. So
well,
now,
don't we all?
Yeah, exactly. The next question is from Tonny Buenas, who is from Freeport, Kemarin, Indonesia. Tonny from Kadin also. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Dino. Your Excellency, my name is Tonny Buenas from Kadin. I'm basically chairing the investment committee in Kadin. So as you may be aware that Indonesia has just recently enacted the job creation law, and also Indonesia had improved the ease of doing business, and it's going up right now. I mean, and also, we have also a huge opportunity in the hydropower and the geothermal, as discussed earlier. And we have also the investment coordinating board now be increased into a ministerial level. So Indonesia is actually trying to do its utmost to attract the investment from abroad, especially from EU. And we have also the SEPA, right? So, Your Excellency, what do you think we should do more to attract investment, especially from EU? Thank you, Your Excellency.
Well, dear Tony, I'll give you a very blunt answer. What Indonesia needs to do is to reassure international investors that their money is safe, that they will not be bogged down in conflicts or be affected by the risk of corruption. I think these are the prime conditions, because if we can organize it in such a way that we can have investors come and also have technology transfers in solar, in wind, in hydro, in geothermal, then I think we can create a win-win situation, because investors would be very interested. I mean, if you look at for instance, in Europe now, we issued green bonds for the first time, green bonds. They were oversigned 11 times. So the international financial community is really, really keen on investing in the green transition, but they also need some security in this. And we need to provide, as public authorities, we need to provide long-term security so that we don't change our policies every couple of years, but we create stable policies over a long period of time. We also need to provide investment protection measures so that they know that their investment is in safe hands. And we need to provide public authorities that are trustworthy and do not go down the path of corruption. So I think these are the things that we can provide, and then investment with a little of support from the development banks, from other institutional banks, with a little seed money from the public side. I believe private investment will be coming.
Thank you. We are in the last 10, thank you, Tony, for your question. We're in the last 10 minutes now, and I want to give the floor to two students. One is Stephen, who has a youth statement that they produce from deliberating on climate challenges during the EU climate diplomacy. And also Mauriza, a youth representative from EU Climate Diplomacy Week, who will also ask you a question. So the first one from Stephen, who will read you a youth statement on demands that we hope you will pay attention to in COP26 in Glasgow. Stephen.
Okay, thank you, His Excellency, Ambassador, and fellow participants. My name is Stephen Setiawan, one of the delegates of EU Climate Diplomacy Week and also Youth for Climate Driving Ambition from Indonesia. I will read the Youth Aspiration for Climate Action, which will compile of 4 subtopics. The first is next, biodiversity. Incorporating biodiversity into the education curriculum from an early age. Second, next slide, I'm sorry. Promoting sustainable use of biodiversity from local communities to increase economic values in the region, for example, through tourism. And the third is involving youth in the policy making and decision making at the regional and national levels. For the food system, we have 2 recommendations. Number 1, implementing an inclusive food system by involving farmers in policy making. And number 2, emphasizing local initiatives in food system, such as diversification, permaculture, and post-harvest management. Next slide. For the waste, we have 4 recommendations. The first is building a waste-conscious society through decentralized campaign with a key message of collective responsibility. Number 2, implementing an integrated waste management and education in educational institutions. Number 3, making producers responsible to the waste they produce in the supply chain. And number 4, involving youth in waste management policy making process. For energy or just a transition, we have 2 recommendations. The first is increasing the awareness and knowledge about sustainable energy for the public. And number 2, ensuring a just transition from fossil fuel to renewables with respect of gender balance approach, sustainable economy, and increasing workforce in sustainable sector. We have final key statement. Next slide. We must realize that youth are the future. Youth must be vocal with their voice because youth voice matters. In order to create greater impact, Youth must do real actions, constructive discussions, and must be included along with all stakeholders across all sectors to make an overall larger impact in society. There are no such words as too late. If we are not the ones who initiate, who else will? Because big changes begin with conscious individuals that come together. Yes, you are one of them. Let's save our planet, save our earth, save our future, and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Now, I would like to invite Mauriza to ask your question, and then Franz will give his answer, and that will close the session today. Mauriza, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for delivering our statements, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Noriza. I'm here as Indonesian Youth representative, and the question is the government decision concerning climate change again will affect our future, and how do you see youth roles in contributing to the discussion and action against the climate change? Thank you.
Franz, you have the last word, first on the youth statement, and secondly on Mauriza's question.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Mauriza, for these excellent comments and questions. We're on the same line. I mean, if I see what you've written down in your statement, that's exactly what also the generation in Europe, your generation in Europe is doing. So it's comprehensive, and it needs to be comprehensive because we are living in a transformational age. And the thing is, let me insist on that, and that's what I really like, and what Stephen has just elaborated on. The thing is, if we want to be able to avoid catastrophe, we need to act now. Now is this year, next year, in the coming years. Every small step helps. So everything you do individually helps. No step is too small, and no personal engagement is too modest. Everything put together will help us make this transformation. But there's also some really big issues we need to address. We need to put a price on carbon. We need to stop digging up coal. We need to stop investing massively in fossil fuels. You know, the IMF has calculated that we are investing $11 million a minute in fossil fuel, in the fossil fuel industry. That needs to shift towards the renewable energy industry. So these are also the big elements. So small steps combined with big changes are going to help us to move forward. Time is our biggest enemy. We don't have time. I think we will develop the technologies with your help, with your generation. You are the smartest generation in human history, the best connected generation in human history. Use that power well. Because we will need it. But we will also need to move now. We can't wait for you to be my age before we act, then it's too late. So we need to move now. We need to take that responsibility and empower you to get there. There's one issue where I would ask you to look at something in a different way. This is not about saving the planet. The planet can take care of itself. It existed for millennia without human beings on it. It could exist for millennia if we destroy ourselves. This is about saving humanity. The planet will be there, whether we're there or not. But if we make the planet so unlivable for humanity that we will end up in endless wars over water and food, and that will happen to your generation if we don't change our ways, and then at the end of the day, the planet will become so unlivable that Mother Earth will rid itself of humanity. And that will be our own fault. And it's not needed. It's not necessary. We can make this transition happen. It's still time. It's still possible. We can fix this. We can fix this. Now, coming back to the issue of what does this mean between the EU and Indonesia, I would say use all the contacts you can gather. Use the EU embassy here. Use all the embassies of the member states here to show your willingness to stay in touch. Ask them for support. You know, the business community is picking up, is now coming more to Indonesia than before. The private sector is interested in investment. I would see academia should be more interested also in exchanges. We will try and make that happen. You know, use all the social media, because social media have no boundaries, to keep these networks going, to create new networks. We will update you on all the developments in the EU. You keep us abreast of all the developments in Indonesia, and so we can learn from each other and work together towards this transformation that will need to happen. You know, Indonesia is a long way from Europe, but you are very close to Europe. Mentally, in terms of education, in terms of your values. We share so many values. We share so many aspirations and hopes for our future. And Indonesia has everything going for it in this transformation, provided you make the right choices and you make them quickly, like we need to do. This is my offer for cooperation. I think you will see that the European Union will pay more and more attention to Indonesia. Indonesia is increasingly a strategic partner for us. Obviously, we have some issues we need to solve, whether it's on vegetable oils or on other issues, but we need to look for a constructive solution now that Indonesia is so clearly committed to avoid a climate disaster and avoid a biodiversity disaster. Together, we can work on a better and stronger future. And without young people, it's not going to happen. And young people can shape this. But keep in mind that we need to act now, and you need to make sure you keep politicians on their toes, businesses on their toes, so that we make the transformation that is necessary. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to have exchanges with you. And let me go back to one thing Emma said: we can leave no one behind. We need to make sure that it's not just you, young people, who are highly educated, who are highly connected, that are part of this. Reach out to your generation of people who don't have these opportunities, who fear that they will be left behind, and make them part of this transition as well. Then we will be successful. Thank you very much also to you, Ambassador Jalal, for hosting this in such an excellent way.
Thank you. That was a very rich session, and we really appreciate your comments, Franz. And for those who are watching, I want to underscore again that we actually been warned by COVID-19, early warning, and the warning was that prevention is much better than reaction once it happens, right? So preventing climate change global warming, as Franz has said, is very important than waiting for it happens and then reacting afterwards. And the second thing is a term that FPCI has advocated very actively, which is climate nationalism. What does that mean? That means if you love your country, then you have to do something for climate action, right? Those two don't separate, are not exclusive, but they're mutually reinforcing. So practice your climate nationalism, especially the young people. Show your love to the country by protecting your future. And Franz Timmermans is doing all he can to protect the future of not just European youth, but the youth all over the world, including Indonesia. So we wish you all the best, Franz. You have our back, we have your back, and FPCI and European Union delegation have worked very, very closely in the past 8 months or so to advance climate campaign in Indonesia. So we thank you for your cooperation, and we thank the EU delegation in Jakarta for working with us on this common goal. Thank you again, Pa. I want to end just with a pantun, because we begin and we close with a pantun. Okay, so roses are red, the violets are blue. A very old line, often overused. Franz Timmermans, FPCI thanks you for working with us on climate issues. Esther is yours.
Thank you so much, Padino. Thank you to Vice President Timmermans. That pantun really closed the discussion well. And once again, I want to thank you on behalf of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia and the European Union delegation to Indonesia for all of our participants watching today. Specifically for you, Mr. Vice President, as you depart our country today, we hope that you find our conversations memorable and that you find an ally, alliances and friendship within us as a country with a potential climate superpower. We bid you farewell and wish you the best of luck for the rest of your tour before Glasgow. And before everybody leaves this forum today, I want to encourage all of the Indonesians to take climate action with FPCI. Sign our petition, change.org/daruratiklim. Ask the government of Indonesia to target net zero emissions by 2050 and reduce emissions by 50% in 2030, and to live up to its potential as a potential climate superpower. With that, thank you very much on behalf of FPCI, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much and goodbye.
Mamy tylko jedną planetę.
Trebuie să o protejăm.
Dobbiamo prendercene cura. Да й показваме нашата любов.
Η κλιματική αλλαγή είναι μία από τις μεγαλύτερες απειλές που αντιμετωπίζουμε.
Mais nous pouvons tous agir.
Para ayudar a combatirlo.
Ja rakentaa parempi tulevaisuus.
Združimo moči. Dela idéer med varandra.
Inspiriamoci l'un l'altro.
Um neue Lösungen zu finden.
The European Climate Pact is here.
Y estamos impacientes por empezar.
Az Európai Éghajlati Paktum mindenkinek szól.
Chaque action compte.
No ambition too small.
Jer možemo svladati ovu krizu.
Maar alleen als we het samen doen.
Maar zing.
Together.
Samen.
Zusammen.
So, will you join us?
Tambayong.
Saya Krisdayanti.
Saya Kalista Iskandar.
Saya Desa Radian.
Saya Ciko Jericho.
Saya Chelsea Islan.
Saya Cinta Laura Kiel.
Saya Dian Sastrowardoyo.
Saya Wulan Guritno.
Saya Julia Stel.
Saya Yoshi Sudarso.
Saya sangat semangat menyongsong Indonesia Emas.
100 tahunnya merdeka pada tahun
2045 nanti.
Kita semua di Indonesia bermimpi dan menginginkan agar bisa mencapai tujuan Indonesia Emas di tahun 2045.
Sungguh suatu capaian sejarah yang indah
dan luar biasa dalam perjalanan bangsa kita.
Nggak kebayang betapa hebatnya Indonesia Emas nanti.
Insya Allah pada tahun 2045 saya akan mulai mewariskan Indonesia kepada putra-putri saya.
Di usia NKRI yang 100 tahun nanti,
saya ingin kita semua hidup dalam Indonesia yang Pancasilais,
yang modern,
maju,
makmur,
sejahtera,
hijau, adil, aman,
bebas korupsi,
demokratis,
dan tentunya bersatu.
Tujuan tersebut bukan tanpa tantangan.
Ancaman terbesar di tahun 2045 bukanlah pandemi.
Bukan lagi kemiskinan atau kebodohan.
Bukan separatisme.
Bukan perang nuklir.
Bukan invasi militer dari luar.
Ancaman terbesar bangsa Indonesia
di tahun 2045 nanti,
the mother of all problems adalah
pemanasan global,
di mana suhu bumi rata-rata akan naik
3-4 derajat Celcius.
Itu adalah suhu terpanas sepanjang sejarah manusia. Suhu terpanas di bumi kita yang sudah berusia 4,5 miliar tahun.
Suhu tinggi akan membuat planet bumi sakit parah.
Saya tidak mau melihat Indonesia Emas dan anak-anak kita nanti
hidup sengsara dalam bumi yang panas ini.
Dengan perubahan cuaca yang ekstrim di mana-mana.
Polusi merajalela dan membunuh puluhan juta orang. Hujan deras dan banjir di mana-mana.
Gunung es di Antartika terus mencair.
Air laut akan naik setinggi 1 meter.
Sumber air dunia akan berkurang dengan sangat drastis.
Banyak pulau yang akan tenggelam.
Semakin banyak spesies punah yang disebut the sixth extinction.
Keragaman hayati akan rusak, suhu air laut yang naik, ekosistem laut yang terancam, serta terumbu karang yang banyak mati.
Penyakit semakin banyak menyebar, termasuk malaria.
Stok pangan menurun banyak dan kekeringan di mana-mana.
Banyak tanah yang akan menjadi padang pasir tandus.
Dan konflik berbasis lingkungan yang meningkat juga secara drastis.
Semua ini akibat ulah manusia.
Namun, malapetaka ini dapat juga dicegah oleh manusia.
Karena itulah, ayo kita selamatkan Indonesia dari bumi panas.
Mari kita mulai mengurangi emisi gas rumah kaca Indonesia.
Ayo kita kurangi emisi gas rumah kaca 50% di tahun 2030. Dan kita kurangi terus sampai akhirnya kita bisa mencapai 0 emisi di tahun 2050.
Ayo hijaukan ekonomi kita, jaga hutan kita.
Jaga ekosistem laut kita.
Kembangkan energi bersih dan kurangi segala emisi karbon dalam kehidupan kita.
Sehingga Indonesia Emas 2045 akan hidup dalam bumi yang nyaman, sehat, dan bahagia.
Sehingga Indonesia dapat menjadi bagian penting dalam solusi global perubahan iklim. Planet bumi harus kita sembuhkan dari sekarang.
Target besar dan mulia ini bisa kita capai.
Ayo kita bergotong royong.
Selamatkan planet bumi. Selamatkan umat manusia.
Selamatkan generasi kita dan generasi seterusnya.
Kita sambut Indonesia Emas yang penuh harapan.
Selamatkan Indonesia 2045.
Sadarkah Anda, kita mungkin adalah generasi terakhir yang bisa hidup dalam dunia bercuaca normal. Kita juga adalah satu-satunya generasi yang bisa menyelamatkan umat manusia dari bahaya bumi mendidih yang menanti kita selamanya di depan. Ayo kita penuhi panggilan planet bumi, panggilan umat manusia, dan panggilan sejarah. Ayo sebarkan pesan ini dan tanda tangani petisi.